Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first ever book chat with Benghis with the esteemed guest read by Kyle. Kyle, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on for episode 1. I feel so special.
Well, you should. I feel a very close kinship to you. I've been chatting with you for years on Discord and in comment sections, but I feel like we come from around the same kind of age generation, and really, but more than anyone else, I feel like we share a lot of the same reading tastes in general.
Yeah, definitely. There's
And
very few
and
things we disagree
yeah,
on, I think.
and in fantasy in particular, like just I think we overlap more than basically anyone else I've come across. And so it's interesting to see where we do disagree. But also, I thought it would be fascinating to discuss our general approaches to reading and how we view books and rating books and the quality of books, because I think we do have plenty of differences. And I
Yeah,
also,
it's
yeah,
very interesting how we're so different in why we read and how we read and what we get out of reading, but we still end up loving all the same stuff.
yeah. Thanks, Rogue. Evening.
Rogue is always here. He's a gem.
Oh yeah, he's just loyal commenter on the channel. Thank you so much. So, first thing, I just wanted to chat a little bit about just our reading habits. So I've heard you talk about that you're kind of like stimulation junkie, and I think we're very similar in this way. I don't like just sitting with my own thoughts very much. Like it
Same.
just doesn't do much for me.
Yeah.
Like I will think about the most random things, usually nothing interesting, and I would rather be reading or listening to an audiobook than just, being with my own thoughts. So if I'm going out to put the garbage outside in front of the driveway, like I get a little antsy if I don't have my phone or my headphones. Like
Same.
for 30 seconds I want to have my phone so I can be either watching YouTube, booktube most likely, or having my audiobook going. Like I don't like dead time in my life. I tried meditating. I like the ideas behind, Zen and mindfulness. But the one time I was in Japan and did like a 30-minute guided meditation at a monastery, that was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Like I was so happy when that was over. Yeah, so I like you. I just want to be reading, doing something. I'm always have an audiobook going at all times of day when I have spare moments. So yeah, I think you're a little bit similar in that, right?
Yeah, I am, and I'm gonna go deeper in this than you were expecting me to. So like, I'm gonna drop some heavies. So I was depressed when I was a teenager, like really, really depressed, and so if I would stay in my own thoughts too much, it would make me a lot worse. Like I would be
Mm.
miserable to be around. I would kind of spiral. And so I just kind of got in the habit then of like not letting that happen too much. And so I would always be listening to music. Like people would always see me like with giant headphones on. Like if I wasn't talking to a human being or sleeping, or I was listening to music.
Yeah.
And then I got into podcasts, and then like I thankfully wasn't depressed anymore, but that habit still kept. And yeah, I just something about like just like doing that for your whole life just makes you need so much stimulation. Um, I do like the occasional time to just like not be doing anything, but I like to structure it. I like to be like,
Mm.
tonight I'm going to go on a walk and I'm not going to listen to anything, or like, oh, before bed I'm just going to sit and just kind of think. But that's pre-planned. If I'm going
Yeah,
to
yeah,
like
yeah.
literally my car is, 25 feet outside that door. If I'm going out to that car, I'm putting in headphones, I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm getting inside the car, I'm pulling out the headphones and I'm starting it on the car. Like, and then I'm going. Like, and it's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that 20 seconds is like that's dead time. I want to progress. I want to get more
Yes,
reading done. And
I'm exactly the same.
I
Hey,
don't know.
that's
I,
Meg.
I I just really like it because I read so many books. Like people think that I read more books than I actually do. Like if I take audio out, I probably read like I still read a good amount. Like I'd say maybe like 70, 80 books a year, which is still good.
Mhm.
Like and they're usually big ones. So it's not like I don't read, but I get so much more books done by audio that it just makes me feel better to be like, "Oh, I've made such a big dent in my
Yeah,
library."
no, absolutely. Before I got into this real, just huge reading binge the last few years, where I've been reading just my reading total in terms of pages and books has been steadily climbing. the last bunch of years. It almost bottomed out around like 5 books a year, like 6 years ago, before I got back into sci-fi and adult fantasy. Really was the big kicker. But then I've just been steadily climbing. I was doing either just books mostly in print, or just doing some audio during my long commute that I was going to New York City for a while. So that was almost like a 2-hour commute. If I did it twice in the same day, I was like 4 hours. I could have to listen to audiobooks, and so I got into the habit of really doing audiobooks for a couple years. But I would only do audiobooks. I wouldn't mix it in hybrid. Where once I got into the swing of doing that, I was starting to fly through books because I was reading them in print, which is faster for me, and then doing the audio at the same time, all the hours of the day. So yeah, audio and mixing it with print too has just exploded.
I've just recently started doing that. And I still, it depends on the book for me. Like I'm very slowly right now. I haven't been like physically reading as much because I've been trying to get all this house stuff done. But I'm reading physically City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is not going to be my favorite book by him, but I think it's his most impressive. Like every single chapter, I'm just blown away by just how good his command on character voice is. But it's basically like a bunch of vignettes. And so it's really hard for me to like stay focused on the overall story because each time I'm like basically starting a new short story. But when I listen to the audio while reading that, I find that helps me a lot more because it keeps me fluid. It keeps me forced to go. And the same with Malazan. If I just read Malazan like without any audio, it just takes me so much longer. Like I just repeat lines and I just like, but if I'm listening to it on audio while I'm reading it, I find that it keeps me moving. And then if I need to pause to like really absorb some information, then I just pause and then I just like reread. But otherwise it keeps me accountable to keep moving. And I love that because I get
nice. And
faster.
I feel like with narrators who are great and just giving you so much in their own interpretation and performance, it helps to, I think, maybe just know like the emotional tenor of the scene, the meanings, the characters with their voices. And I don't know where you are. Are you in Memories of Ice? Are you in the House of Chains? Ralph Lister.
Yeah.
Ralph Lister was spectacular,
incredible.
I thought,
yes.
at doing the tone, but also just thousands of different voices that all are very distinctive. I thought he was the perfect narrator from Malazan. Page does a great job too.
Yeah, like he's been good,
but he's not
the same.
It's not like that perfect ideal marriage of narrator to writer and book like Lister was.
When I started Gardens of the Moon, I was also listening to Shogun, which Lister does, and so like, you normally, if I listen to 2 audiobooks at the same time by the same narrator, something is gonna really like I have to stop one. Like I just can't do it. But that was not the case with Ralph Lister. He does both of those books so differently, and I was never confused. I wasn't like, wait, am I listening to Shogun? Like I always knew. Just doing that at the same time made me realize how eclectic he is, and he's one of my favorites now.
Oh yeah, no, he is spectacular at being chameleon, changing his voices, and he was riveting for me in Malazan. I did a lot of the first 3 by audio. The switch to Page in House Chains was so jarring for me because I got so used to Lister.
At least he's following a different character, though. That's what helped.
And then I thought Page was like really suitable for the whole Karsa novella at the beginning, but it took a little while for I think Page to find his footing, and then once we hit Midnight Tides, I think Page really just like became great for Malazan again.
Awesome.
But Nikki just finished House of Chains. It took over a year. Yeah, that's an interesting book. I think I will like that book a lot more on reread because there's just a lot of sections there that are kind of slowish that pay off more. I think if you know how it all ties in and some of those larger character arcs.
I got spoiled on. I don't want to lead this too much. There's a major thing about Karsa. You know what I'm talking about. I got spoiled on that before I started the book. So that actually did help orientate me because I would be like, why would I care about this? But now I know why I should care. But yeah, House of Chains has not been my favorite of them so far, but I still have like 2/3 of the book left. So
it was probably towards the bottom half of my whole first read Malazan books. But
I have to call Esme out here on this. Esme, are you just a bad driver? Like I don't understand.
No. I wanted to come back to this because I can listen to audiobooks while driving, but only if I'm driving alone. Usually, if my wife's in the car or someone else, then they'll start talking to me and interrupting the book, and I have to press pause, and then I also don't want like if they're not in the middle of the same book or like know what's going on, like then I'm just listening. I feel weird about it. But if I'm driving alone, I can do it because that's multitasking I can do. I listen a lot while I'm walking, driving, mowing, or doing yard work is like my favorite, because then I can just like get into this flow state almost with listening and just the physical task. That's my
Yeah.
favorite. But I know a lot of people who are new to listening, they sometimes can have trouble with just I think the auditory processing side of it
Yeah, I
and
mean,
the
it
listening
takes
comprehension.
practice. Yeah,
And
it's something that people think that they
yeah.
can just, like, know how to do.
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
no, it's a
Yeah.
skill. Like, your brain has to,
For a
like,
long
adapt.
yeah. For a long time I listened at one time speed, and then just gradually started increasing it until it was like 1.3 and 4. It just felt to me almost like one time speed used to feel, where it's like, oh, this feels exactly the same. But I can listen up and still understand everything around 2 times speed, maybe even faster. But I do enjoy hearing the performances usually more slowly. And so even if I can understand it at 2 times, I will usually stick closer to like 1.3, 1.5.
You are the slowest man on that's crazy to me. 2 times, like, I honestly mean it right now. If I went down to 2 times, it would feel like molasses. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
why
yeah.
so I get what you mean. I totally get it. But, like, when people tell me that they're like, "Oh, like, when you listen to it really fast, you don't get the performance." I'm incorrect. I listened to all 10 First Law books from Stephen Pacey. I promise you I got that performance. It's just that your brain, like,
Yeah.
adjusts to how
Yeah,
fast
yeah,
they're
it does.
talking.
It does, yeah.
So, but it does depend on the narrator. Like, I don't have a set speed. Like, I'm just listening to Turn of the Screw right now. It's being narrated by Emma
Ooh, I
Thompson.
read that. I read that back in 12th grade for like my a research paper that I had to write.
Yeah, so I didn't know anything about it until I watched, like, Haunting of Bly Manor. And I was like, well, I should read this.
Huh.
And Emma Thompson is the narrator, and she's good, but the way that she talks is like, I find a lot of celebrity narrators aren't used to the flow of audiobooks, so
Mm.
they're more stilted. And so if I'm doing it fast, it sounds really choppy. So I just slowed it down to
Ah, yeah, yeah.
2.5, and then she sounds perfect.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the narrator to me.
This is an interesting point to estimate. She was listening and loving it, but then when she switched to reading, it stopped being so great. So
This
I
happens to me
felt this
too.
way. Like I started reading The Poppy War in print, and I also started reading Cradle in ebook form in print. And I was like, the prose, which prose usually is not something that bothers me. It usually just needs to feel like very clunky, or for it to start to register that I'm not enjoying the prose. But I was not liking the prose, seeing it with my own eyes with those two authors. But when I switched to audio, Zeller's performance, I think I stopped noticing the prose. And
Yeah.
then same thing actually with Cradle. When I was listening just to Baldry, I was having a blast with it and just more immersed in the story. So I feel where Esme is coming from.
Yeah.
Sometimes things do work differently in print or audio.
Yeah, I'm gonna call out a book right now, because shots fired. 11th Cycle is a terrible book, but if I had listened to 11th Cycle, like when somebody tells me they like 11th Cycle, my
Mm-hmm.
first question in my head is, did they listen to it? Because if they listen to it, I could maybe understand. But like, man, the way those sentences, because you could just flow past words that don't make sense. Like you're like, oh, this sentence doesn't make any sense. But by the time you stop to process that sentence didn't make any sense, you've already moved on to the next sentence. But like reading that book physically, I was like, this sentence actually has no meaning. And so I just hated it. So that was a book that I should have listened to, because I was like, maybe this is tolerable if I listen to it. But yeah, just
Yeah,
some
no, that's
slander here.
interesting though. Like a lot of people will read it in print. So if you slam it and give the prose a bad rating because you saw it in print, like that's still useful for all the people out there who might be picking up in print and might want some of those warnings, or who people like me who are like, yeah, I've seen enough about the prose where I think that one's not for me.
Yeah,
And so
I wish.
I'll let yeah.
Can you highlight Nikki's comment real quick? I want to say something about it.
Which one?
The one about the one
This
about her
one?
down to 1.2.
Oh wait, where's that? Oh wait, listen to 1.2 times. Yeah.
So this is something that is really, really true. And I think people that don't listen to a lot of audiobooks get discouraged when they like can't do the fast speeds. But like your brain is a constant, like your brain is not set in stone. Like there are days where even though I listen to 3 times the speed normally, there are days where I've had a long day at work and I'm listening to a book and I'm like, no, I got to put this down to 2.4. Like I can't focus on it without it. Like, so like I I think when people are starting out with audiobooks, they think my speed is X. And that
Yeah.
thought is just not really very helpful for the fact
Yeah.
that like you every day you are a different person, every hour you are a different person in terms of what you can process. So like, yeah, if you have kids and you're dealing with kids, you know, and you got to do the dishes and the kids, you know, need food and then you go to listen to a book, your brain isn't processing as fast, that's totally normal. Like so,
Yeah.
you know, speeds
Exactly.
fluctuate and
Yeah.
that's okay.
The wildest thing for me, I can actually observe that happening to myself when I change the speed drastically when I'm going from immersive to just audio. So if I'm like for books that I love doing immersive reading, like sharp books, because I never want to not have Rupert Farley's audio, or same for Sun Eater, like Samuel Rockin. Like there are some series where I don't want to miss out on the performance. So
Mhm.
like I will never just read it in print. So for those, like I'd be when I had moments to actually like pick up the book, I'd turn on the audio and I read usually around like 2 to 2.5 times the normal narrator speed. Like that's how
Yeah.
fast I would just read in print. And so for immersive, I might do it like 2 times. And it is really hard for me to calibrate it and actually stay on track with the narrator. That is
Yeah.
annoying in immersive reading, but I will be successful with that around 2 times to 2.2 times. And then I will just be like the narrative performance, like it sounds normal to me, like it's like I'm processing it fully as I'm reading, and it also helps me process it while I'm seeing it. So, and then when I put the book down, and all of a sudden the audio sounds faster to me, and when I like put it back down to 1.4 or 1.5, like it'll feel the same as to what it just was when I was reading it immersively. So yeah,
Yeah.
you are so right. Like our brain's never the same, and are on different days. We can grow with it. We can get faster at processing. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's all about tricking your brain. Like that's how I got fast. Is that like so for anybody who does want to get faster, and I tell people this sometimes, and they confuse it with me saying that you should do this to enjoy audiobooks. No, if you want to go at 1.4 or whatever, like live your audiobook life. But if you do specifically want to listen to audiobooks faster, say you listen normally at like 1.5 speed, just put it up to 2 and then just sit there and listen to it and don't do
mm-hmm.
anything else. Just try and focus. It's going to be too fast. It's going to sound really, really fast. You're going to have to really think about each word and then do that for like 2 or 3 minutes and then just go back and reverse, specifically reverse, because now your brain already knows what those words are, and then put it back down to 1.7. Then when you listen to it that time, it's going to sound way slower. And if you keep doing that over time, like, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, your brain gets tricked into thinking that it's slower than it is. And then that's how you listen faster. Good night,
Amazing
Esme.
tips there. I might try to do that to increase just my more comfortable listening
Mhm.
speed, because I'd love to get through more, because my TBR is many thousands of
That's
books
why
long.
I
Yeah.
specifically tried to get faster because I was like, I got to get through books quicker.
Oh, Heidi says, "Oh wait, I missed my exit." Yeah, like I will totally get distracted even if I'm driving. Like I have to like I don't want to miss something when I'm listening, even if I'm multitasking.
Mhm.
If I'm doing any kind of task that requires like a mental like processing of language, or like certain kind of thinking, like anything to do with work or sending an email, like my focus will be fully on that, and it'll leave the audiobook. Like I can multitask while walking or like mowing the lawn or driving, but I can't do it with certain things. And I don't want to listen only like half-heartedly to a book. Like if I miss something, I will rewind. And
Sometimes I
so
do.
yeah. But I
Like
know there are some people like Andrew Wizardly Reads, like he talks about he has like a data entry job and he listens while he works.
that's
And
crazy to me.
I
Good
know
job.
I just like that's cool. He can get through so many more books that way. But I'm probably certain that he is missing a good chunk, like just little bits from this sentence, little bits from this paragraph, and he was focusing on like some other information, because your
Sure.
brain can't do that kind of multitasking, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it definitely can't. And I know, so I'm aware, like when I listen to a book, I'm missing some of it no matter what. And like it's the goal of trying to make sure I catch the majority of it. And if I like the book enough, I'm probably going to go back and just read it physically at some point. Um, so like it's not that big of a deal, but it's like if I zone out for 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I need to go back and reverse and like act. But if I just notice real quick there's a passing car, I didn't pay attention to whatever that person just said. And sometimes that can result in like really big misunderstandings. Like
Yeah.
here's a funny one about Cradle, because you know about Cradle. I don't know what the deal was with Cradle. I was trying to binge them really quickly because they were leaving Audible Plus, and so I wanted to
Yeah.
catch up
Yeah.
with them. So I listened to them faster than I normally would have. So this is why this happened, and I got distracted. I did not understand who Little Blue was. I knew there was for like 4 books. Like I knew there was like a little spirit person that healed Lyndon, and I knew they would just sometimes say Little Blue, and I just never correlated those two. Like I don't understand. Finally, I was like, who the hell is Little Blue? Why do they keep saying Little Blue? And I had to like literally go on Reddit and ask, and everyone's like, did you even read these books? And I was like, no, I swear I did.
No.
And so that kind of stuff can happen all the time.
Little Blue gets that pretty big like intro in the very first book when Lyndon meets her.
Yeah.
So like if you kind of just like miss that, where like he obtained Little Blue or like met Little Blue, and like, there was a little explanation of Sylvan River seeds or like but they're purposely I think vague about like what Sylvan River seeds were.
And then there are times where like it's even something where like say characters will be introduced and somebody will say like, oh, this is my brother, but if you don't catch that's their brother, then they're talking, you might be spending time being like, are they setting up a romantic relationship here or aren't they? But like you would have never even had that thought if you knew the context that was their brother. You know what I mean? So it's you have to really pay attention.
Yeah, no, I do. When there's lots of tiny details that could be meaningful. So like I'm listening to a lot of Song of Ice and Fire over the past bunch of months, and I find I often will go back and reread chapters in print that I had just listened to because there's so many characters and different like historical references, like family relations mentioned, and it's sometimes hard for me to keep all that straight listening. So I do like to go back. That's why I love doing books hybrid, just being able to read and listen at the same time or separately and reread stuff that I listened to. I also listen to things. It helps me go to bed. So I don't go to sleep easily at night if I have nothing to listen to. I used to listen to like sports radio growing up for many years, but I don't really love that, but it would help me go to bed. And then I can usually listen to audiobooks at night, and that will help put me to sleep. Like I'll set a sleep timer for an hour, and I'll usually doze off anywhere from like 5 to 45 minutes in. And then I'll just the next morning pick up the book in print and be like, ooh, where does my memory completely fade of this? And I'll be able to find it pretty soon. Be like, oh, I'm going to pick up here, or do a little rereading for when I was like really drowsy. But it helps me a lot. But I get in so much extra reading that way. Although occasionally I am so just engaged by the story that I know that's keeping me up, and I have to reset the sleep timer, and then that's an issue. But most days it helps me, especially if the narrator is less like engaging. So like what's his name? Roy Detrice, who's doing Song of Ice and Fire. Like he really is nice for the night because he easily puts me to bed. But like others who are just more engaged, like Rupert Farley doing Sharp, like even if it's in a part of a book where it's not even like that climactic, like I'll be so engaged by that performance that it's tough for me to go to bed. So it does hurt that I only do one book at a time, which is something I wanted to chat about.
Yeah. So what I was actually just going to say, one thing that you can try, and I know you're really into like the one book at a time thing, but this is what I have multiple audiobooks going for different reasons at a time. And it really helps me. Like, so I just finished a book today called How to Be Perfect, which is like a moral philosophy book written by Mike Schur, who's the creator of The Good Place. And it's kind of like comedic, but like also like introducing philosophy concepts for like the average person, and like using like the cast of The Good Place to like narrate it and stuff. The narration was really good. I really, really liked it. But the reason I finally started it is that when I'm working, so I get an hour at the end of my shift, or like 45 minutes where I'm closed at work, like I'm a bartender, but I have to do all of the close. So some of that stuff is like mopping, which I can do like, whatever, but I also have to count all the money. So I have to count 2 different tills, and like, then I have to tip out the other bartender. So I'm doing math, but I don't want to have to stop listening to what I'm doing to do the math. So I just, instead that whole time, I just listen to a book that doesn't engage me with plot. So I usually do a memoir, or like, because that was like easy moral philosophy, and it was also like kind of funny, it was like easy to do. So I only listened to that book while I was working. So I finished it this morning because I had 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
But so then now I know I finished that entire book just while I was doing math at work. So it's like, you could have a book that's specifically like, oh, when I have more like, more demanding stuff, but I still want to listen to something, I just listen to this memoir, or I just listen to this history book or whatever. And you'll make slower progress, but because you're not interested in the plot, you don't feel like you have to make progress all the time. And then that might make you more books going.
Yes, I tried this recently, actually. Chatty, I was listening to The Silmarillion for years. That sounds like an awesome choice. Nikki also says Missing Things drives me crazy. I'm the same way. Nikki, we are reading Kindred Spirits. Too much of a perfectionist, so lower priority books going for bedtime or other times where you messed up. Yeah, that's a good idea. Kyle, you and Nikki are right on with having different books going for different purposes. I did try it recently with a little bit of history, The Rise of Athens
Yeah, you told me.
audiobook by Michael Page. Audio by Michael Page. Anthony Everett?
Anthony Everett, yeah. He has a lot of good history books.
I was enjoying that because I learned a lot about Greek history in college, but it's been a long time. And so like, it's fun to kind of go back through it in this narrative form. And that's real, like history. I found I was not usually staying up because of the book, but it was helping me get put to bed. So like, that is an amazing idea. And Chadia and Nikki are all, I think, right on with this. The problem I have is that when I am in the middle of a story that I am engaged in and loving, I just want to always be in that and making progress in that. And if I'm not, I'm missing it. Like I'm more than halfway through Dance with Dragons right now. It's really picked up for me. I'm into it. Like if I switch to listening to Greek history at night, like that's like 20 minutes where I'm missing out on making some progress in Dance with Dragons. Like that's tough for me. I love being immersed.
You're an immersion junkie. You really are. And that's great. Like I love it. But I just don't get immersed like you do. Like even when I was reading A Dance with Dragons, I finally listened to the David Reed's A Song of Ice and Fire YouTube channel where he's went and done all of the A Song of Ice and Fire books, the sample chapters, Dunk and Egg, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just on his YouTube channel, which made me go slower because YouTube only goes to 2 times the speed. But I listened to all of Dance with Dragons with that, and it's excellent. It was so nice to finally be able to listen to A Song of Ice and Fire because I don't like Roy Dotrice at all. But yeah, I listened to that over like 4 months, man. Like I just would like listen to 2 chapters, but that is also a reread, so it's a little different. But
so I think my experience with Dance was hurt because I split it up. So I did like the first 100 pages of Dance, then it was time for me to pick up Fool's Fate as part of a buddy read. And I rarely do this where I just like read multiple books at once or just stop reading and pick it up later. And I feel like that hurt my momentum with Dance immensely, like just waiting 2 weeks. And then I was on a trip where I could only listen intermittently and just like during bedtime. And I just feel like that really hurt my experience with Dance. And so I can't even like judge Dance the same as I can the other books because
interesting.
I split it up
because I'm usually now sometimes. So there are times like I'm reading The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee right now.
Mm-hmm.
I have some criticisms of it, but it's so far it's decent. But I'm not very far in, and the reason I'm not very far in is that I started it, and the beginning of that book throws out like a bunch of characters. Like they're all like, yeah, that one there, and it like. It's not like it's too many characters, but I hadn't solidified them in my mind. And then I stopped reading it for like 3 weeks. And then so when I went back, I'm like, wait, this is the sister of who? So it's like I didn't give the book enough time to settle into who everybody is. So now I feel that disconnect going back to it. But usually I can drop a book and pick it up back up. Like I haven't read House of Chains in 3 weeks, but I promise when I come back to it, it'll be fine.
So you do lots of books at once, right? Like a bunch. So
I'm reading like 10 books right now.
Yeah. So different people are doing all over the place with this.
Yeah.
So Chadia prioritizes one, but does multiple books. Nikki does a variety, and so it doesn't get bored.
Yeah, I like the variety too.
Nikki's long envious of my ability to commit completely to a single thing. So like last December, I was just loving The Expanse. And so I'm just like, I'm just reading The Expanse this December. And I was so immersed in it. I was only thinking for like a month, only thinking about those characters, that world building, that plotting. Like I was catching every tiny little detail that, for little things. So there was no other book or, and plots and characters that were kind of clouding that experience. And so for me, that is definitely the way I know that I will get the most out of my series is to do them that way. And I kind of wish I did that with Song of Ice and Fire. Because all these little details with,
you'll do a reread at some point. Like,
I know.
I know. Yeah.
The reread will benefit. I've done a Song of Ice and Fire over the course of essentially a year, pretty slowly for me, and I feel like, that's hurt my enjoyment a little bit compared to what it would have been if I just binged. So I do really see merits in binging, at least for me. But if you want that immersion, like I feel like. When I'm just so familiar with the author's style, the world, the characters, like I essentially can disassociate and truly like get immersed. When we say get immersed, like I am no longer me with my identity, where I am, like I am just living that story from the character's POV. visualizing what they're visualizing or whatever I'm cooking up. But I really just like love that feeling of getting into that flow state with reading and kind of dissociating and
I'm so jealous of that.
yeah.
Like I
So
don't think that's ever happened to me.
So you don't get that really?
I
Like
don't
or
think
have
so.
that?
Maybe I just described it differently. So, A Song of Ice and Fire, I think, is the only one that I can really say I felt like that with. Maybe Stormlight Archive,
Oh.
but A Song of Ice and Fire, I feel so immersed in. Like when I read it the first time, it was just like, and I can't even explain how formative it was to me. So at the end of Dance with Dragons, I'm not going to tell you any spoil. This is just like a really random thing. So the end of Dance with Dragons happens, and then you're there, and then there's a sample chapter at the end of A Dance with Dragons for a character for like the beginning of Winds of Winter. And in that, they introduced the Maester of the Dreadford, which like that doesn't matter, but they say like Maester Bob or whatever his name is. And I remember thinking, like I vividly remember finishing A Dance with Dragons and they introduced Maester Bob, and I was like, oh, now we know who the Maester for the Dreadford is. Like I've never thought that, like there's Maesters in every castle. This is an absurd thing for me to be like glad we got. Right. But I'm just like, oh, that's another detail filled in on this world. I'm like, now I know who the Maester for the Dreadford is, which is to me just insane. Like I would never feel that way about anything else. But it's because that series feels so real to me that it's like discovering more about the actual world. When we get more, I'm like, oh, that's now I know more about this thing. So that's the only time I can compare it to.
But like, so I'll come at it from a different angle. So when we read, what was that book called? The Empire's Ruin. Is that what the book was called by Brian Staveley? So it feels like almost the title of a series. Like, solid title. So I was not as immersed in that story as I would be for books that I would rate like 4 or 5 stars, which I gave it a 3. Because I was continually like kicked out of my immersion by like thinking about like, oh, I don't think this metaphor really makes sense to me, or like I'm seeing blazed for like the 100th time in the prose.
That was one of your best moments.
So I was, when I'm like in the flow and reading, like I am really not looking for nitpicks like that. Like I am just like just posting through the story from the character's point of view. I'm not like questioning things, looking for plot holes, nitpicks in the prose. So like maybe that can convey more of what I'm talking about with my immersion, where it's like,
no, that's never happened to me my entire life.
I'm not like thinking about it like, oh, like this is interesting from more of like my critical analytical brain. So when I'm immersed, I'm not using that part.
Okay, so Words of Radiance is my second favorite book of all time. I love Words of Radiance. I think it's spectacular. While reading it for the first time, and I read 750 pages of Words of Radiance in one sitting. That's how much I was liking that book. So I was pretty immersed. While reading that book, I turned to my wife, who had not read Stormlight Archive at all, and I just had a mini rant to her about how the gender politics of writing don't make any sense in this world. Because I was like, this literally doesn't make any sense. Like women are the ones that write, but so writing is power. So like if in the real world or any world, if women had all of the power of writing, they would be the ones in charge. Maybe not like on the surface, but they would at least be under, there would be like a shadowy cabal of women that just run everything. And then it's confirmed in that series that actually women do write themselves little notes to each other to be like, haha, my husband's a dumbass and he stinks, haha, whatever. But then they don't be like, hey, actually, I'm telling you to do this, but actually tell my husband to do something else, so then that way we can take power. That's not happening. That's bullshit. That doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely ridiculous. This would not happen. And I just had to get it out. And I turned to my wife and I was like, you don't know what I'm talking about, but I just have to get this out. And then I went back and I just read the whole book. So I'm never not analytical of like how things don't make sense. I just have to acknowledge, I'm like, oh, this is dumb. And then I just move past it. Because if I like something enough, it doesn't matter. That does not impact my opinion on Sanderson's world building, which I think is exquisite. It does not impact my feelings on Stormlight Archive. I just think that is a dumb, silly, nonsensical world building part. And that's fine. And nobody's going to, I don't think there's anybody that's going to satisfy me completely. Like there's always going to be something that somebody overlooked. And that's fine. I just have to point it out and then I'm done.
Yeah. No, I'm lucky, I think, because Nikki's here saying that only 30 books out of 1,600 have turned off the critical brain.
Wow, that's not me at all.
I do think this is an actual, real, studied psychological phenomenon. I haven't learned about it very much, but Joanna did a video about getting into the flow state. I know that there's this actual psychological term of dissociating
Yeah.
from your kind of
flow is an
yourself.
actual state that you get into
Yeah.
when you're really, and it's really good for like alleviating anxiety and performance, and
Mhm.
it's like really good to be in a flow state. I do not know confidently if I've
Yeah.
ever been in a flow state for anything, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think I'm pretty lucky because I read a lot of stuff that I give 5 stars to, 4 or 5 stars. And I generally do that based on my level of immersion and like engagement. How hooked am I? How much do I just, can't stop thinking about it or want to return to it throughout the day when I'm not reading? Like how gripped am I to this book and story is how I usually rate. And so 4 and 5 stars, I'm usually immersed for most of those. And I think that means it's pretty easy for me to just find that state with books. So I think I'm pretty lucky if that's the case.
Yeah,
If it
that's awesome.
rarely happens for Nikki. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, everything has positives and negatives. Like my negative of doing that is that I'm never fully immersed, right? Which I would prefer to be. But then the negative of your approach is that if you wait a year or 6 months between a book, you're suddenly like, Tyranny of Faith is trash. Richard Swan is trash. Honestly, I think Richard Swan should just cut off his own finger so he could never write another story. How dare he? And I'm like, Ben, could you just relax? And so, there's positives and negatives.
No, that is a huge downside. Is that I have found for me like binging completed series or chunks. Whereas like if I can only read a book one, like that is really hurt. Like I bought a huge amount of new releases that came out last year, but I ended up not reading most of them because I wanted to wait for more books to come out. Justice of Kings was one that got the short end of the stick on that because I read that early on after its release and then took a year before I could read Tyranny of Faith. And like, I don't think there was a huge drop off in quality.
There wasn't. I just crazy.
I wasn't, if I had read that right after Justice of Kings, I probably would have liked it. I'm guessing I would have liked it.
Yeah. And that happens. We all make we're picking up books at random, hoping it's going to work. And then look, I hate The Bookcatcher in the Rye. And I will never not hate The Bookcatcher in the Rye. But I'm pretty sure that if I had never read it and I picked it up now, I would probably at least appreciate it. I don't think it would be like a favorite. I would understand why people like it. But I read it when I was 16. I hated it. I will never not hate it. That experience is ruined for me now. Because of the time in which I read it. It is never going to get better for me. I'm very confident about that. So like sometimes it's just you made a mistake. Like you did it. And like I do it all. Sometimes I'll listen. So I listen to The Handmaid's Tale on audio. And I didn't really like the narration. And I also felt like the narration pointed out things to me that I just didn't really like about that book. So I was like 2/3 of the way through it. And I was like, I think I should have just read this physically. But now I already don't like the book. So I'm like, I don't really want to take my time to go reread it physically. So like, I'm like, oh, I just made a mistake. I just experienced Handmaid's Tale the worst way.
Yeah. Sometimes that happens and we just got to absorb that and regret it or like figure out how to not make some of the same mistakes. But sometimes we can't because we don't know what an audiobook's going to be like until we do it or the print book. So we just got to dive in and do it. But I really liked all of the characters, the narrator from Justice of Kings, the narrator of the story, like the character narrator.
Let me ask you a question.
But then I couldn't stand her in the sequel.
Let me ask you a question. The third book just got the cover released today. It's coming out in February. If I read the third
cover
book,
looked great.
If I read the third book and think it ends really well, will you agree to reread the series and give it a try again?
Reread? Oh no, I will. I thought you were gonna say read the third book. Oh man.
No, you have to reread to re-immerse yourself. You liked the first book. You know that you like the first book.
Oh man. But the second book, I think, soured me on like the whole writing style and the characters.
You're the worst.
But
you're the worst.
If you say that it ends really well, like really well, like not just like decently, but if you think it ends really well,
it's like a Jade Legacy kind of thing.
I will do that to give it the best chance of landing for me.
I'm just saying
because if that middle book could be just more of like, oh, let me just pass through on the way to a better finale, I think that would work better. Whereas like that's my only installment for the series for like a year, and that's where it ends for me. Like, man, the middle detective plot it felt like this is just setting up plot twists and turns for like this last act of the book, and it lost me so badly in
It did
that
lose
middle
me a little. I
section.
guess it's why I didn't like it. Like, I think the reveal earned itself for me, but I can understand it not earning itself for somebody else. But you just went like hard in the paint against it. You were done. I was like,
So
oh, I don't know if I like this as much, but I'll keep it
yeah.
going. And you were just like, I hate this. I'm gonna burn it.
So this is Empire of the Wolf. I don't have it on the shelf. I
He
relegated
burned
it
it
to the
already.
closet.
He burned
I
it.
relegated it to the closet.
You can send me them. I'll take them.
It's in my pile to like sell back to a used bookstore, but maybe I'll hang on to them in case I do this reread if the ending's really good. So this is Empire of the Wolf. Also, terrible series name, honestly. It's just like very generic. And like
It's
I
very
don't
generic, and it doesn't tell you anything about the series. Like, it's a terrible name.
Really bad. So Justice of Kings, some authors just go for like they call their series whatever the first book title was. Like this first book title should just be the series name. Like Justice of Kings, like that tells you it's like has this law theme that really differentiates it from others. So yeah, like Jake, I really like Justice of Kings. It felt different and fresh for modern fantasy, and I really connected to the narrator character and the other side characters.
October would be such a good time to read it because the second book is spooky spooks. Like, I think the second book is legitimately creepy.
Yeah, it did. So the thing is, even if it's not that bad, I get upset if I lose my immersion. So like, if a book just isn't connecting with me, if I am not engaged, like, because I know so many books can engage me. It's like the fact that it happens so frequently, it really pisses me off because this is what I do for decompression, my hobby, my free time when I'm not working, like doing family obligations. Like this is what really like fulfills me in my free time is being engaged and immersed in cool stories. And so when a book is not providing that, like I get upset. Like I feel like I'm wasting my time. I get upset at the authors for
I don't do that at all, man. Like different books do different things. Like I understand where you're coming from, obviously.
So like when Tyranny of Faith just stopped engaging me, like it felt like a chore to read instead of just being the usual like immersive, fun, engaged thing that books usually are for me. Like I got pretty upset. And when that happens, like the book can almost not, there's nothing it can do almost at that point. Like you said, I made the mistake. Like it's already on this track. I'm biased against it. Like I have my critical brain on and I'm thinking about all these things that I wanted to do better. And so like, if I lose that immersive state with it, and I feel like the author's done some things I don't like, then there's like it. Yeah, even when we got past that middle section, like there was very little I think that Swan could have done to rescue it for me at that point. So like I was not being fair to that book for sure, but that's because I get ultra upset when I'm the books that, especially ones that are in series that I've already been engaged by. Like,
let me therapize you.
I had such high hopes for that one.
Okay, let me therapize you real quickly here. So the first thing is that this is all a reaction in your head, which, as you admit, like it's your reaction. You're getting mad. So, like one thing you can do to try to in the future. I'm not even talking about like with this book. Like, it just means in the future if this happens to you again, is to just like stop and ask yourself a series of questions and like try and reframe how the experience is going, because I don't agree with you that there's nothing the author, or there's no way that it can get back on track, because it's already a reaction that's happening within you, right? So you can easily get yourself back on track if you know the right strategies for you. And I don't know what those strategies are, but one thing that you could do is think about how we have delay of gratification all the time for all sorts of things. You know, when you really want, chicken Alfredo, and then you get out the ingredients, you're not like, well, I'm not eating the chicken Alfredo now, so like this is a worthless experience. I just like there's nothing these ingredients could ever do to like. No, of course not. You're like, well, I gotta put the ingredients in, and then I gotta cook it in the oven. So that's not even a thing that crosses your mind as to be upset about. But in a book, you prioritize immersion. So when you get knocked out of that immersion, now you're on the off-beaten track of where you want to be. So it upsets you. But if you try and think about, if this part of this book is maybe setting up for a really good finale, then like I need to get through this part as part of the overall building blocks of the story. And then maybe if the ending is really good, I can overlook these parts.
Yeah.
Because I do
that's
that all
fantastic
the time.
advice. Yeah.
And then when I get to the end, if the end isn't good, then that's when I get mad. I'm like, oh, I wasted my time. I was deluding myself. This was going to be good. But at least then if the ending is really good, I can be like, well, okay, the middle, because that's exactly what happened with me at Tyranny of Faith, which is that the middle of that book, I did not think was very strong. I was like, we're really meandering in side quests here. But I'm like, but it feels like there should be a purpose. And then I was like, okay, The ending was really good. I saw where he was leading to. It wasn't the best reading experience in the middle, but at least it went somewhere that I ended up enjoying. So there's my
That
little
is
tirade.
fantastic advice. I often feel like, however, that my reactions to a book are so subconscious, like really out of my conscious control, that trying to more consciously analyze the situation, it could help on that more analytical level, but I don't know that it would rescue me in terms of my almost like subconscious level of emotional attachment to the book or the engagement. But I think it would help. I think it can't hurt to
I
try
don't
doing
think
some more of that. Yeah.
I don't think like it would then like say you'd done that with Tyranny of Faith. I don't think then you would have been like, I am now fully immersed again. But it might have went from like a hate experience to like a 3.5 star or something, where you didn't feel so negatively about it.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point by Colin. Enjoys not thinking critically while reading. Enjoy being able to look back critically once I finish. Yeah, I'm with you. With a lot of the Malazan books by Erickson and Esselmont, I was kind of ahead of where Philip Chase and A.P. Canavan were in their kind of buddy reread. And then they would always do non-spoiler talks and spoiler chats about like every book. And they do the same thing for the Wheel of Time. And so I almost just watched the Wheel of Time show just so I could watch their discussions, because I so enjoy their discussions.
Dude, you were so funny. You were literally, I saw you in Discord. You were just like, wow, the finale was so amazing and incredible and wonderful. And oh, I am so immersed. And then Hillary came in there and she was like, yeah, I don't even know if it was that good. And you're like, no, absolutely not. The way that you feel when you're watching it is super totally the totes validest. And then you watched Brandon Sanderson and Bookborn push it apart. And you're like,
yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, no, you can find a lot when you're critically analyzing shows and movies, especially, but books too, like plot holes that you didn't see if you were, not being analytical while you were reading, and yeah, that does reframe how you view it. I think you were right about that. It is okay to kind of reevaluate it, but like for books that I did not enjoy, like some of the Malazan ones that really I connected less to than others, so like parts of Reaper's Gale and the whole of basically Toll the Hounds. But watching Philip and AP really dissect all of like the interesting thematic things, and that's an aspect of reading that I am really not paying much attention to as I'm reading the first time. So like diving deep into the themes and how those are explored in interesting, nuanced ways, and just doing like close readings that AP does, like yeah, that could bring appreciation that I did not have before. And so I think, Colin, you're right. Like there's a lot that you can gain even after books that you did not really like, and they can help you appreciate them more. Like I know I'm going to appreciate Toll the Hounds more on second read now that I have a lot more context for it and seen so much interesting discussion around it. And knowing that like Erickson wrote it like right after his father passed away, and that things like this, and like how the change in the book's narrator is kind of like an interesting window onto the whole kind of series. And AP talked about it being the cipher of the series. Like I have so much more interesting things to think about now going into that book. I think I will appreciate it more.
That's awesome. I've heard very mixed things on Toll the Hound, so I don't know.
But
I feel like I'm on the side of people that will most likely enjoy it, but I don't know enough. Like I obviously don't know what it's about or what's going on, but
yeah, that's as it should. Just like every Malazan book is so different, which is kind of cool. Like there are some series where it's just like each book is just the next volume in this overarching story. Like Wheel of Time really often felt like that, whereas just like the books didn't have too much of an individual identity. But Malazan books, man, each one is so different, which is cool and interesting. But you don't get that traditional just like journey of the same characters throughout that you follow. Let's see. Nikki has never had a book land once she's decided she's fed up with it. Yeah, so she's been like me, where it's like once you've soured on it, it's tough. Never tried deliberately not to be sassy with it. I'll remember the Alfredo approach going forward. What a wonderful analogy that was. That was great.
This is related to what you're saying. I don't know that this happened to you. It just reminded me. Another thing about like books is that this drives me crazy with people where like they read a popular series, but then they don't listen to like what people say about that series. And they just expect it to be like amazing right out the get-go. And then so they're like working against the hype on like the non-hype part. Like, so this drives me crazy with the Blade itself and with like Red Rising specifically.
Yeah.
If you listen to anybody who reads those series, almost all, like the overwhelming majority of people are like, yeah, like the Blade itself was like a lot of setup, like there's stuff going on, like you'll kind of see where the plot's going, but like it's mostly just setup. And people with Red Rising, they're like, the first book is kind of doing some weird like Hunger Gamesy stuff. There's some good parts, but like it's not really representative of the whole series. And you are free to agree or disagree with that criticism. But I don't like when people start Red Rising and then they have all the hype of how people are like loving Lightbreaker or something, and then they're comparing that hype of like Dark Age and Lightbreaker to like stupid Darrow like in his war games, and they're like, I don't understand why people like this series, bro. And I'm like, you didn't listen to anything that the people said. So I'm like,
Blade itself has no plot, like all that stuff, like oh, nothing's happening in the Blade itself. So this is something that I often get annoyed about too, that people approach series like without really, and the individual books and series, not really taking into account like how much the whole thing really is one story, and each part is doing something different and matters for the entire thing. And we don't always have to look at each individual book as representative of the whole thing. So I'm right with you there.
It depends. So if you're somebody who just picks, because some people just go and they pick up a series that sounds interesting. Like if you just walk into a bookstore and you're like, I've heard vaguely about Red Rising, I think this sounds interesting, and then you start it and then you like, I don't see why people like it. That's fair. It's when people come into book spheres and they hear us talking and they hear people talking about it, and then they just don't incorporate that into their like thought process. Because like you have 7 books in Red Rising, or you have, the 9 and short stories for First Law, and it's, they're building upon each other. That being said, I think Blade itself is awesome. So
me too. I'm right with you there. But she's saying people leave Hob too early because they're comparing the hype of the books. Yeah, a lot of people, it seems, just read the Farseer trilogy and are like, oh, that was okay, or didn't love Assassin's Quest, had issues with it, and so they're just like not going to continue. But Hob to me just felt like completely different author, like leveled up in every way going into Live Ship.
The Farseer to Live Ship stretch like that is a big step.
Oh my god! I took years to pick up Live Ship just because like I was like, Assassin's Quest ended. I was like, oh, I'm just not feeling so needing to continue this right now. Like I didn't love the trilogy. Like I gave each one 4 stars because I just didn't truly like connect with it too well. But that changed fully in Live Ship and then into Tawny Man. So those have all been 5 stars for me, which is nice. Where are you in Realm of the Otherlings?
I finished Fool's Errand. I want to read Golden Fool this month, but I don't know that I'll get time. I probably will just read Fool's Golden Fool and Fool's Fate back to back in November. I want to finish Tawny Man by the end of the year.
I mean, that's a Tawny Man trilogy is so interesting to figure out what's going on there. But it's like each book is such a slow burn. Like she does these really slow beginnings, and all of book 2 is like, this is a setup middle book, but for the whole story of the trilogy to be told, like everything in there is essential. Like you can't just look at book 2, Golden Fool, like on an island, judge it for what it's alone doing. Like if we just skipped it, like nothing that would be happening in Fool's Fate would make sense. And so, I'm a big fan of looking at series and trilogies and just on the whole of what they're doing instead of really like dissecting the individual books.
Yeah, it'll help with me because Fool's Errand, I know, is some people's like absolute favorite. Like I know it's one of Jake's favorites. Like a lot of people who I align up with really love Fool's Errand. So I really wanted to give Fool's Errand the time of day. So I didn't want to just listen to it on audio. So I kept delaying it. And I listened to some of the audio Immersion, and I did a little bit just audio, but I mostly physically read it because I wanted to get the full like emotional experience with it. And I did, and I think that book's excellent. But Golden Fool, I'm not saying that I don't think I'm going to like it or that it's not good. I just hear a lot of people say it's like middle book. It's like it's setting up a lot of stuff, and I already know that the narrator is great. So I'm probably just going to fully listen to it on audio. So I'll get through it way faster once I start.
Oh, Langton kills it. Like he
so good. Yeah,
totally really is good. Fits for me, and the Fool as well. Voices for animal companions. Like he is spectacular with the emotional heaviness of it all. Like amazing narrator for that trilogy. But like I'm curious now because I follow like everything you're reading for years now, but I don't have a good sense of like your like top 20 series. So I wanna kind of go through, kind of hear like what would your top 20 actually look like right now?
Top 20 is too much for me to do on the spot. Like I wouldn't know, but like number 1's A Song of Ice and Fire. Number 2 is, I mean, if we're conglomerating everything, it's the Cosmere, but if it's not, it's just Stormlight, and then like Mistborn, and then would be a little bit further down. Dandelion Dynasty is really high up there. Jade
Ooh.
Legacy, or like sorry, Greenbone Saga, is way up there. Realm of the Elderlings is getting there. Like I know I have a lot to go with it, but I have a lot of faith it will remain at the top. Let's see. I mean, I love the Uhtred books. I'm rereading them slowly. I just think they're fantastic. They get really repetitive. Like I'm only rereading them slowly so that I don't get the burnout, but they're great.
I don't think that'll register for me too much because I was binging a lot of Sharp books, and they are very repetitive in the story structure. But I love Cornwell's writing and just his authorly sensibility. It just connects so well with me. Like his characters. I think I'll love the Uhtred books. Can't wait for this.
Yeah, and like you have the first 4 with Jonathan Keeble, and I just finished Sword Song, so that's the 4th one, and now I have to switch to like Matt Bates or whatever, which I'm sure he's good, but he's not going to be Jonathan Keeble, and I'm like, oh man. So those first 4 just out the gate are really great.
Oh, that's cool that series is so high for you. Oh, nice. Oh, I can't wait to do that.
Yeah, so when
these last 2 Sharp books,
before I started getting fully into fantasy, my top 2 series, like top 3 series of all time, were like A Song of Ice and Fire, like Harry Potter, and the Uhtred books. Like I love those books.
Oh, nice.
So they're really good.
Oh, Neetha's about to finish Realm of the Elderlings, dragging these last 200 pages out because you want to savor them. Yep,
I can see that. I think I'll read Assassin's Fate really slowly.
When I get toward the end of something I'm loving so much that I go faster. Like I would love to savor them, but I just devour it because I'm enjoying it that much. But
sorry,
Nikki, we're talking about
the Last Kingdom books, the Saxon stories.
They have three different ways that people talk.
Well, they were called the Warlord books, but then like the Warlord Chronicles. So he just can name things very confusingly. But yeah, the first book is the Last Kingdom. They made a TV show off of it.
Oh, I cannot wait! I love Cornwell. He's having like his moment of the last couple of years in the fantasy booktube sphere, which is great because it got me to pick up. Alan was going on about the Sharp books, so I picked those up and loved it. And Rupert Farley, the narrator, is one of the best, like Stephen Pacey level, amazing. So I just love the Sharp books. I got 2 more to go. He just released one. I got a new release Sharp book that I'm going to do next. That is back.
I need to get back. I did the first, like the India trilogy, and I thought it was great. And I just have not picked up another one since. But Cornwell is definitely one of my favorite authors. And
man. The Warlord Chronicles, like what an amazing trilogy.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. That's one of my favorites.
That one I connected so much to emotionally. Sorry, I'm interrupting you in the middle of this. So you're going through.
That's okay. That's okay.
Dandelion Dynasty is one that I haven't read. Okay. What else is in your top?
So Harry Potter would be one of them. I've reread it too many times to not count it.
Yeah.
I read a lot of good stuff last year. Wheel of Time would probably make the top 20, even though I skipped, but that's because I skipped so many of the ones that people wouldn't like.
Yeah.
So, but that one was really good. Basically a lot of things I read last year would probably be, and it's
Red Rising.
Definitely in the top 20. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of the reasons. First Law. I can't believe. See, we were talking about it earlier.
Yeah.
First Law is top 5 probably. My top 5 is probably, I can tell you right now, is Song of Ice and Fire, Stormlight, Dandelion Dynasty, First Law. Ooh.
Greenbone?
Uhtred. No, Greenbone.
Oh, Greenbone.
Yeah. Greenbone.
So I didn't know you loved Greenbone when I read it, or else I would have been more like chatting with you during it because I had a great time with it.
Yeah,
I loved it. But interestingly, I started out trying to just do the audio, and I didn't connect to Kishino's narration in the beginning.
And then you got into it, right?
And then it might have been just the plotting actually in the beginning. Like once the main inciting incident happens in Jade City, like I just started loving the story. The narrator was clicking more, so it might have been a lot of things. But I ended up really loving that series. It was great.
Jake out here being the worst, but also yes, Serentine Mosaic is also one of my favorite series. I don't consider it a series. It's like a duology, which I guess is a series, but I feel like a series is 3
basically
or more.
not. Yeah, it's basically not. It's like duologies are tough, especially when it's like that one. Is it more like it's just one thing in 2 volumes? Is that what it feels like?
Well, okay, so Jake thinks that, but I disagree with him. I think I think the first book tells a story that's very clearly self-contained. It's a little bit unorthodox of an ending. it's one of those things where if you know there's a second book, I think you would be really unsatisfied with leaving it in the first book. But like
Yeah.
when it was released, if he hadn't have told people there was a second book, I think people would just be like, "Oh, it's interesting that he chose to end it here, but I can see what he's going for, like the themes and like where everybody ends
Mhm.
up." I don't think it's not a cliffhanger by any means. It tells a
Oh, okay.
self-contained narrative. It's just the overarching story is clearly not over. And so if you know it's a duology, it feels like you just did all the setup parts.
Yeah, Jake's apologizing hypothetically, if he were the worst, but is not. Yeah, Jake is very solid book opinions. I don't know that I've really come across big disagreements with Jake. But so Heidi asked a question earlier about like why do I want to read faster?
Yeah,
Like why
I
do I want to
wanted
get
to
through
get
so
back
much?
to
Like
that too.
I have so many, not just books on my TBR or like physical books that I picked up at used bookstores. Like I have so many, like hundreds of like, it feels like priority books and
Yeah.
series that I think are right up my alley that I might love, that I'm feeling like bereft that I have not experienced them yet. So like
And we'll never get to them all
I
before we die.
yeah, I hope I have a long time reading before I die, but even then it's just like, wow, am I just limited to 100 books per year? Like if I actually try to extend my
Mhm.
lifespan to a very very lofty number that's aspirational, I won't get to that many books before I die. So like I want to get to more. Like I have not read Dandelion Dynasty. Like I think this is right up my alley. GGK, like all of his books.
I can't believe you haven't read GGK yet. It's so easy. They're standalones, Ben.
Yeah, no, but
Um,
like I'm in the middle of Realmly Elderlings right now. It's like I can't just not read that and Song of Ice and Fire. And those are
yeah.
chunky books. Like
You're
they're
almost
taking me a
done
long
Song of Ice
time.
and Fire, at least.
And so like there's like so many things that are just taking up my time. But I want to get to Five Warrior Angels that you're reading now, and just like so much else that is. So
I'll give like
yeah.
I'll give an actual numbers because this numbers was existential to me. I had problems. So I remember posting on Instagram when I got to 1,000 books that I had like read on Goodreads. So I posted about it. I'm like, hey, I've read 1,000 books. It's not going to be totally accurate. There'll be like some short stories in there or whatever. But like overall, I've read about 1,000 books. Like woohoo! That was in like late January, early February of 2022. And in that picture, it showed my want to read list. So that
Yeah.
want to read list was like, I don't remember the exact number now, but it was like 520 or something like that. So I just looked recently, and it's been a year and a half since I made that post, a little bit more, like a year and 7 months. And I have read 1,540 books or something like that. So I've read 540 books in a year and a half, which is crazy numbers. But I'm not bragging about that. What I'm here to tell you is that the want to read is at 770. So I read 500 books in less than 2 years, and my want to read increased by over 200. And that is the problem, is that the more you read, the more you're aware of other things you want to read. It's never going to end. I'm not trying to get through all of the books that I want to read, but I do
Yeah.
want to, especially now that I've like solidified what my interests are, I want to start narrowing that number down, and like at least in my physical library, because there's a lot of books there's like a lot of nonfiction books or like historical fiction books that I own that I bought when I was in a different phase of life, and I'm sure that I would like them, and I still want to read them. That's why I haven't gotten rid of them. But I think I will read them once, say that was good, and then I can get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And or if I'm wrong, if I read it and I really love it, then I know that I love it, and then I can keep it and
Yeah.
be proud that I own it. So there's so many books. Like I'm just unpacking books right now, and I'm like, I have 75 nonfiction books that I haven't read that I'm pretty sure I'll only read once. So why shouldn't I just read them and then get rid of them, and then so
Yeah, clear match. But Jake says we disagree about Lord of the Rings, and so this is a weird one for me because I love the movies. Like I saw them in the theaters growing up and was so attached to them. Rewatched them periodically, watched them with my wife, and she loved them. And so it's a story I love so much in one format. And then I picked up Fellowship of the Ring like when I was younger, and I got to Tom Bombadil and like, oh, this is not the same as The Hobbit. I'm putting this
Tom
in.
Bombadil sucks.
And so
I said it here. I'll say it everywhere.
I was in this middle of this fantasy binge, like reading all the Cosmere books, Dresden Files, Faithful and the Fallen. Like these are all really recent, fast-paced, accessible types of modern fantasy stories. And then I tried to pick up Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm wanting just like more of that. And it is so not that. and it was just not the type of read I needed. It also weirdly like clashes with the film adaptation that I love so much in terms of just being a different form of the same story. And so I did not enjoy reading Fellowship of the Ring, but I will come back to it when I'm ready for that and knowing what it's like and wanting to just do the whole story through and seeing it more as the first volume of a story. And so I will give it a whole nother chance when I'm in the right headspace for it. So
I've read
yeah.
Fellowship of the Ring 4 times. Well, I've read Lord of the Rings 4 times. I hate Tom Bombadil. I hate him. I've hated him many times. I hated him as an 11-year-old reading for the first time. I hated him as an 18-year-old trying to give it another chance. I hated him being narrated by Rob Inglis, and I hated him by being narrated by Andy Serkis. There's no version of Tom Bombadil I don't think is a bag of shit. I'm sorry I'm making a lot of Lord of the Rings fans mad, but I'm just telling you, Ben, it is okay to not like Tom Bombadil. He's in 2 chapters or like a chapter and a half or whatever. He just says, "Oh, Tom Bombadil, oh, Tom Bombadil," and then you're done with it forever. So you just got to power through.
The problem was like Fellowship just felt like it was a lot about just getting to the next place. And like we were just continually like, oh, not much is happening except like we have a goal of getting to this next place. And like, oh, maybe it's gonna change, the storytelling's gonna change once we get to this place. But then we got to that place and it's just like, oh, we need to go there now. And then we need to go there. And I think I just need to view it as just the first volume, the stepping stone. I think also doing Andy Serkis might help as a narrator.
Really good as a narrator.
Since I'm familiar with him from the movies. And I think that'll help. And I just need to come to it with different expectations, not wanting to be just like engaged and immersed in the same way I am like during Faithful and the Fallen.
I find Lord of the Rings incredibly immersive. Actually, earlier, Lord of the Rings is also one of my favorite series.
Interesting.
It's probably been pushed out of the top 5, but probably top 10. And the reason it's not in the top 5 is honestly, I don't like Fellowship of the Ring that much for all the reasons you're saying. I think Two Towers and Return of the King, excellent. But I've always found that series very immersive. Like I don't get immersed in the same way you do, but I don't really like descriptions of places and things and trees and stuff. But the way Tolkien does it, I just find very mesmerizing.
Beautiful writing.
Really
it's just I don't prioritize prose, and this might be a good segue into the next.
I did forget to say Dresden. Oh my God, Dresden's top 10.
Okay, yeah, Dresden. Before we but I do want to segue into the kind of discussion of how we approach like thinking about books and their quality and how we rate them, because we could get into like different aspects and what we think like prose and all that. But so your top 20, your top 10, like it does overlap with a bunch of mine, like Stormlight Archive and Dresden near the top. Also, I think it's hard for me to do this top 10 and to like separate out like what do I think about the series in isolation versus their like emotional impact for me, because the ones I did early on in my fantasy journey, like Harry Potter growing up, like love that. I don't know how to compare Harry Potter to other series. I read it so many times growing up. And the ones I did though early on when I came back to fantasy, like Mistborn got me back into adult fantasy. And I was just reading more literary stuff before since college, but Mistborn and then Stormlight and then doing Dresden Files and Faithful and the Fallen and First Law. It's like the ones I did early on, like they made such a giant impact on me. It was all so fresh too, like coming back to this. So like it's hard for me to disentangle like all my emotions and nostalgia and with those. But I have reread those and still love them. So I don't know if what's going on. But Stormlight, Dresden, Mistborn, all near the top for me. Ones that you and I disagree on. Another one that I read early on though, and I think this didn't change it. Faithful and Fallen. So this was like one of the first of that style. Like I didn't grow up reading, the Last Kingdom books or David Gemmell. Like this was very different feeling from Sanderson's stories and the Dresden Files, and so like it felt new and fresh, and I emotionally connected to the characters so much, and it was so suspenseful. I love the action, and like if I had saved that and read it later in my fantasy journey, I don't know if I would have loved it as much.
It's really hard to say. You could have liked it less. But also, like, on paper, it is very shocking to me that I did not like Faithful and the Fallen that much. Like, it's very shocking. I like John Gwynne. I love the Bloodsworn saga, and it's not different enough where it's like, it's one thing if it's like Adrian Tchaikovsky, where it's like you like one thing, but then something else is like totally different. Bloodsworn is just Faithful and the Fallen with different different beings and Vikings instead of Celtic. So it's like very similar, but it just worked better for me. I don't know. Faithful and the Fallen should not be 4 books. Like, I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry to everybody who loves them. I'm sorry to Will and everybody. That should be 3 books. 4 is absurd. Sorry, not sorry. And I just had a lot of problems with it. And it also didn't help that I was buddy reading it with Jordan and Alex, and they also had like we had very similar problems.
Yeah.
And so we were echo chambering it. So like, I'm aware of it. I don't think it's like some dirtbag terrible series. Like, it's not The Witcher. The Witcher sucks. There's a lot of good parts of Faithful and the Fallen. I just think it's very repetitive, and I just didn't. I really didn't like the short chapters. Like, I
can see that.
A chapter every 2 pages. I was like, can we stop, John? Can we just let ourselves?
I love the short chapters. I love just switching. And this may be like, you like spent years rereading Song of Ice and Fire, where, you know, big multi POV saga, but the chapters are longer, and like it's longer between coming back to the characters. And like Gwyn style is just like rapid fire rotation between all of them. So like, I loved that. But if you didn't connect to that, like, I feel like Fondali does a nice middle ground. Like, I felt like her chapters usually weren't too long, but also weren't too short.
I don't necessarily need long chapters. It's that all the characters felt very samey to me. Not all of them. Most of them felt very samey to me. There's a particular trope that I'll tell you off air if you don't know what I'm talking about, but I don't want to say for anybody who hasn't read it yet, that John uses over and over and over and over and over again in the series, that I'm just like, why? Like, why are you doing this again? And then there's a very big cliffhanger thing at the end of Ruin that is like immediately not what you think it is at the beginning of Wrath. That makes me so mad that I'm so like
all of these things, they seem to me to be valid analytical criticisms, and they just wouldn't have affected my read at all, because I was like as gripped and immersed as you could be with my analytical brain turned off, just along for the roller coaster ride. Yeah. And so like I was just so immersed. It felt like I was like a kid again reading Harry Potter, was like the way it felt for me reading Faithful and the Fallen. And so like all your criticism valid, but this goes to something that I want to segue into, like how we approach thinking about books or rating them. But for me, it's almost like a binary situation. Like, is a book or series, is it connecting? Is it working? Or is it not? Like, because then it's either I'm immersed, it's working for me, it's a yes, it's in the 4 to 5 range, then I'm just splitting hairs, or is it not? And I feel like with you, it's probably a little more complicated because you don't have that immersion factor going on. So like, but Faithful and the Fallen to you, it's just like, it was not totally working. And so you were registering more of these nitpicks maybe than you would if it was just like overall clicking. So like when it doesn't click for me, I'm registering, I think, a lot of things that just people, they might say are valid, but didn't register for them because it wasn't part of their experience. They weren't thinking about it like that. It's like, for me, I really think books are they're either connecting, it's a yes, or it's like a no. And I'm then finding all these different nitpicks and things that people who like it aren't finding. And I do think, to an extent, especially with people who I think get immersed or not, it might be more of that going on. But it's hard for me, to think about like, oh, like for some, like this book and author are just clicking. And so like everything they're doing, it's all working together. The prose, characters, plotting, world building, setting, like it's all contributing and it's all just clicking. And I do think it's more of that generally going on when we're reading a book or watching movie or TV than it is like certain individual aspects of the writing either clicking or not. Like a lot of people they do separate out when they're analyzing the book. Like, oh, what was the characters? I'll give a rating to that. Or how was the setting and world building, or the action, or the plotting. But I don't necessarily think that those individual aspects can really be like separated from each other, because they're all working in concert. And like a symphony orchestra, like it's all the instruments kind of working together. I really feel like with a book, it's very similar with the different aspects of writing, or with the movie, like the writing, the acting, the plotting, the visuals, the music, it's all working together to shape our experience.
So I agree. Yeah. Sorry, you can finish your point.
No. That basically set up. I'm curious what your take on that.
I agree with you, but I also don't. So like, I approach, like, when I really think about reading versus like watching movies and TV, like I've always really liked narrative. like, and I've always really been interested in like the process of it. And like, I've always like, I wrote my own stories when I was like 10 years old is when I started writing. And like, I'm just always thinking on like different levels of the pieces. So like, I agree with you overall. Like, yeah, the music adds and like, it's hard to dissect when things are working. So if you take the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there's not a thing that makes that series work. Like, you can't just be like, they cast Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, so now everything works. Like, no, it's working because it's like 200, 300 people coming together and just making just a great work of art. They're just working really hard, and it just worked. It doesn't necessarily work that way when it's not working. And like, it's still not going to necessarily be down to one factor. Like, it's still, all these people working together in concert. But it's much easier, at least for me, to point out, like, I'm like, you know what, this person, like, so, okay, I'm going to take a different example here. The prequel trilogy of Star Wars, a lot of people were really hating on Hayden Christensen as Anakin. And I'm not saying that's one of the best performances of all time, but I was, since a kid, since a long time, my whole life, I'm like, I don't think this is Hayden Christensen's fault. He was working with terrible direction. George Lucas does not have a good history of doing this well. The writing, just absolutely terrible. There are well-known anecdotes of people saying that like George Lucas would not take like feedback on how to write the story or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it just wasn't working well. It was edited awkwardly. And then now he just reprised his role and people really liked him. So I'm like, see, I told you, like, I knew that it just wasn't, you guys are pinpointing the wrong thing because he's the face of it. This is a long intro to what I'm trying to talk about, which is that when I'm reading, I'm still applying that same process. And like, just because it's what I think is the problem doesn't mean that necessarily is what the problem is. Like, it's just my thoughts on what the problem is. But I'm never not thinking about the overall art of it. And so I might think, like, if we're using Faithful and the Fallen as an example, I might think the short chapters are breaking up my immersion, and I could be totally wrong. If I had liked the X, Y, and Z, I could like the short chapters. But that's the thing that I'm noticing. It's like how people are noticing that they don't think Hayden Christensen is Anakin, but that's not necessarily what's actually the problem. So I try to then think what is actually the problem, because I don't think the short chapters are why I didn't like Faithful and the Fallen. I think it was a symptom of the problem. So all that is to say, I really am jealous of people who can just like sit and just experience the story and then not think about it till later. I've literally never done that. Like, I've never done that one time. It's not in my DNA at all. And people tell me, I'll tell them like, how did you like this stupid show? Like, it's doing X, Y, Z. And they're like, I just didn't think of it. And I was like, I don't relate. Like, I don't understand.
And even when I'm immersed, like, I am curious kind of what is contributing to the book working or the ones that aren't working. And like, you're right. Sometimes if I'm thinking I'm nitpicking like this plot hole or this character's voice or the prose, like maybe that's not actually what is not connecting. It's just like one of the main symptoms. And I do think that our experience with movie, TV show, or book, it is so tied up into this overall mixture of aspects that we think we're better at disentangling them than we are. Like, I hear so many people like mention their character readers, or like, and what's fascinating about that, first of all, is that like I almost never hear people saying they're character watchers of like TV or movies. But for
it's
readers,
funny, I actually talk about it that way. I'm like, because Lost is one of my favorite TV shows, and people are like, what about, like, I always get in this argument with Bookborn. She's like, what about all the stuff at the end with Penny's boat? And I'm like, I don't care about any of that. The characters are great in that show. Like, so yeah.
I'm with you there. That's fascinating. That you're a character watcher, but I feel like people are just naturally more. It's like it feels more natural to view TV and movies as like these mixtures of all the elements working together, like the acting, writing, directing, visuals, music. Whereas in books, like it feels like you can tease apart the different aspects more, like the prose and the characters and plotting and setting and world building. But I think they really play so much upon each other, like the prose just underpinning it all, and the same characters like in a different plot or setting might not connect with you or might work better. But it's all like every book has its very specific mixture of all those things that kind of like feels very mysterious and magical for me in terms of like what that effect is on me. Like, I just love certain things so much, just like, the Mistborn trilogy, like the original Mistborn trilogy. But like, I feel so connected to those characters, but is it more that Vin is in that city setting with the ash falling from the sky and the particular magic that they're getting to know and all of the world building details and setting and the atmosphere, like with that character in it, with Sanderson's like architecture of the like plotting of that series. Like I feel like I can't really take out the individual aspects and analyze them or figure out how they're connecting with me or not, that it's all working together. And so when I hear so many people say they're character readers, it fascinates me because like I really wonder, like, are they truly just most interested in, is it more that they say that and they're just interested in how they connect to a character, like they want to really emotionally connect to characters and that's what they mean. But I think they might, people that say that, I hear it so often on BookTube, they might discount the effect, I think, of all of the different aspects and how that affects their connection to the characters or their engagement with those characters, like in the certain plots and settings. And I know you've talked in your other chats about like, you think, you know, books stand on, is it 3 pillars, like the prose, characters, plotting, no, world
I had
building. It was
four.
a 4?
I had
4,
four. I
4,
had
yeah.
4: world building, plot, character, and prose. And that I can take any of them being weak, but there has to at least be like 2 pillars that are like holding it up strong enough that it would stay up as a good book.
Okay. Yeah, so you want at least a few of those pillars. So you
Yeah,
do
'cause
really separate them. Yeah.
I think, like, look, people read for different reasons. So if you just want, like, people have busy lives and they just want to read something that they know they're going to love. And if you only love, you know, Roman historical fiction, and you only want to just read like an adventure story of the week, Roman fiction, and that's just how you, or you just read Clive Cussler for till the day you die. That's great. That's like, I don't have any ill will against that at all. But I don't read, like, I value different things. So like I can read Stormlight and like it for these reasons, and then I can go and read a memoir by, like, you know, a political activist or something and be like, oh yeah, I like it for this. And then I can go read like a horror book and like it for something totally different. And even within the same genre, like if we're not even switching genres, I might think like, so thinking about like Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which I'm also reading right now. A lot of people compare it to A Song of Ice and Fire, and it's not reaching any level near A Song of Ice and Fire to me. Like, it's not even close. But that's not because it's worse. It's just, I already love A Song of Ice and Fire, and I think Tad Williams' excellent writing, like excellent writing. I don't like his characters nearly as much, but I can like it for the fact that I just feel like it's a good vibe. I like the magic. I think the depth of world building is really creative and interesting. And I can also get enjoyment from seeing how it influenced other things that I already love, like A Song of Ice and Fire. So I'm getting a different experience from it, even if like the thing that it's commonly compared to, I don't feel has the same strengths for me personally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. No, you're amazing at reading widely and just like hitting different things, I think, with your different reads. And I'm the same way, at least within fantasy. Like we both, I think, are in the minority, I think, in terms of really appreciating the more accessible, popular side, like the Sanderson side, along with the denser, more literary side of it. It often feels like there's a divide in the fantasy fandom and readership between like the more accessible prose and like Sanderson side and the like
and then those people try to
Malazan side,
put
the
down
Hobb
fans. I'm like, no,
the
don't do
Hobb
that.
Erickson, like Baker side of things, the ones who are writing with more overtly kind of literary intentions. And Sanderson said that he tried doing that early on, it just didn't work for him. But he's consciously kind of writing in a more accessible way, and does it amazingly, I think. But like, yeah, I'm with you in loving variety. And so even just within fantasy, like getting something different from, you know, Tress or Yumi the Nightmare Painter than I am from Hobb and Realm of the Elderlings. And it's great to be able to get so much different variety with our reads, and for them to be like really prioritizing different things is cool. That keeps my reading life, I feel like, really alive and fresh and vibrant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he does have lots of pattern. Like, somebody not liking Sanderson is fine, and like Jimmy has been like very straight up, being like, sometimes I love Sanderson stuff, and then sometimes he's just like goofy and he does alloy and mid. And that's totally fine. It's more so, and like Jimmy's not a person who would ever say things like this, where he'd be like, "Oh well, I really like Cormac McCarthy, but like that dumb Sanderson prose is just terrible. Like it's not like." that's when I'm like, okay, come on, like they're doing entirely different things. Like you can like Cormac McCarthy and Sanderson, and like, or you can like one and not like the other, and not like think the other one is just like complete trash. Like it's fine to respect but not like.
I have trouble with that though. Like when that guy Donahue, the I don't know how to, when he was on Jimmy's channel, and he's this like vaunted literary book critic. Like that was fascinating because he was delivering so many very subjective book opinions so confidently, but truly as if they were objective kind of
I didn't watch that, so I
ratings
don't know.
of
It's on
quality.
my watch list.
But it was so entertaining. It was an absolute hoot. Like Jimmy kept on naming authors and series, and he and us just had no clue if he was going to say that's garbage. Like he kept on saying that's garbage, or if he was going to say like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, I don't typically vibe with that stuff.
It seems so random and like obvious that like, oh, that's because our enjoyment of art and books is subjective and based on subjective criteria. But I intellectually know this, and I try to be very fair on my channel when I'm wrapping up books and trying to say why I dislike things or pick out reasons why and justify critical opinions I might have. But it can be hard when something just hits us in such an extreme way, like Skullsworn. Yeah. So like we both
bad.
read this. So like we both know though that there are people that enjoy it and that think it's great literature, fantasy literature, and I have trouble wrapping my mind around that though, because it just, I feel like they read a different book, but I know it's subjective, but yet it didn't seem like there was anything in there that people could praise.
So, taking off my trying to be silly hat, I hated Skullsworn, but I can understand why someone would like it. What I don't understand is why so many people think it's good. Like it has a good rating, and I don't fully get it. But I'm not like I can steelman a person who would like it, which is like they want like a strong female character that's badass. They really like assassin stuff, or they really like training quests. They found the magic and world building really cool, which, like, to give Stavley consistent credit, he's always really good at atmosphere. Or they just wanted like a short, fast like book with like you got to go A to, because it is really fast paced, and they just don't really think. Like, I could see reasons for that. Where I come into problems is the book Rage by Stephen King, because recently I saw someone say that their friend Rage is their favorite book of all time, and that actually hurt me. Like I had to sit there and think about, like, what could this person possibly have liked about this book? And I only think that about two books apparently, which is Rage by Stephen King and Ready Player 2, which is also garbage. Any other book I can steelman into why somebody would like it. But I was just sitting there. I was like, why would somebody have Rage as their favorite book of all time? And I'm like, it has to be like they were marooned on an island and they were going to die, but they only had Rage. And they're like, if I keep rereading Rage, eventually someone will rescue me. So they just kept rereading Rage, and then they got rescued. And now they just associate Rage with saving their life. That's the only thing I can think of, because that book is legitimately awful.
Oh man, I DNF'd that. I did try to read that at one point, and I agree with you. But like, it can be tough when we're presented with an extreme example. I think there's a feeling deep down that like we can be arbiters of objective quality.
Yeah.
And in the extreme examples, but even then, I think we are fooling ourselves because we are applying certain subjective criteria to it. But I think it's interesting because we all balance it. Like I think when we give our opinions, like we often recognize, unless you're Donahue, that there is subjectivity involved, and so this is our opinion. Other people might disagree, but I do think there is usually at least a part of me that feels like when I really love something, that there's some objective quality to it, or if I hate something, that there's some objective lack of quality there. It's hard to just like accept that it's completely subjective and about where I was at this point in my life.
I don't think it's completely subjective. I do think there is a level of objectivity to it. It's just that when people say objectivity, some people mean literally the definition of objectivity, and some people, then no art is objective, because literally it can't be objective. But then other people, when they say objectivity, they just mean some sort of like some sort of external validation source of whether or not that thing is good. And so those two schools of thought often come into conflict with each other. But I don't think look, I think Sanderson is objectively a good author in the sense that a lot of people really connect to him, and he is making art, and that art is speaking to a lot of people. So whether or not, I do or don't like Sanderson myself, objectively, his art is being experienced very positively by a lot of people. So if we're looking at objectivity through that lens, then that would be something that he's objectively doing that is like an accurate measurement of what art could be doing. But a lot of people push up against that because they think objectivity is just like what actually objectivity means, which is that like it is or it is not. It is absolute, like this table is objectively a table, like, something like that. So I think it just depends on people's frame of mind when they come into it. Also, Nikki, do you like alligators that eat people's clothes? Like, what is going on with you? I like alligators too. You know what I don't like? Alligators that like really like naked people. Like, I don't understand. Okay, we got to move on. I can't get into this.
Jake's saying, yeah, I don't fully buy objective quality, but yeah, some books are objectively fantastic. This is what, yeah.
Jake is doing the exact thing that I knew that he would do, because this is what I mean. That's not really objectivity, though. I know, but he is objectively having a positive experience with lots of people. So objectively, he is an author that is connected with a lot of people. So if you are, that is an external objectivity of measurement, which then that is what objectivity is. But it does not mean he's objectively a good author. And that is the disconnect that a lot of people, it depends on what you're trying to establish. And people come into conflict with that.
If this is an interesting chat about, is there objective quality in art or writing, or is it all subjective? There is a very deep philosophical dive in this with the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And one of the main characters, or the main character, there's flashback stuff when he was a professor of writing, and he kind of has a philosophical crisis about this question. It's like, how can he grade students' writing? Like, is there objective quality? Like, he's just about like, yeah. Is it just about like showing like examples of things that have been deemed quality to the students, and then like we know it when we see it? But yeah, or is it more like Philip Chase, who went to a college where they did like no grades and just like wrote up?
Did you go to Vassar?
No, Evergreen State in
Evergreen,
in
Evergreen, yeah.
Where
Brett Weinstein, I remember, yeah.
Where the professors like write essays like about the students' like progress in the class rather than like giving a number grade, which is awesome and really cool. But yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. Like intellectually, I know my takes on books are very subjective, but like when I feel like I come across ones that are just awesome in every way, like I feel like I've tapped into some objective stream of quality there.
So this Donahue guy, because I didn't watch this, it's tough to tell because you don't know what's in somebody's head, but did you get the impression that he actually thought X and Y were garbage, or was he playing it up to just be like, because sometimes I'll say that. There's one thing to be like, I hate The Witcher. Like I say that all the time, but like if I'm actually, talking about it plainly, I'm like, well, there's this thing that's good, and like I can see why somebody would like it there.
No, what's fascinating is that it seemed like he truly believed that these things are garbage. It's like one of the authors he thinks is garbage is Cormac McCarthy, who Jimmy has been loving reading, and he like gave a few reasons, and yeah, it was fascinating because like when Jimmy brought up that Harold Bloom, the famous critic, like said that Blood Meridian was like the greatest novel ever, like he couldn't seem to assimilate that fact, or like that Harold Bloom would have that real opinion. And so he surmised that was because Harold Bloom actually hadn't read it and was just saying that about like a trendy author and book. Like he couldn't assimilate this idea that like a reader he respected would have a different subjective like reading experience of that book than him.
Yeah, I don't think this sounds like a thing that I want to watch, but I'll make.
And he kept on saying stuff like that people who come to. He kept on saying stuff like people who come to Stoner, like he hated Stoner, and said like that John Williams was just like this mid-lister hack of a mid-20th century author. Like, but Jimmy was like, he kept on saying like, oh, people who come to Stoner, it's like because they have preconceptions about it. They've been told it's good. And Jimmy's like, no, I came into it with no expectations. and he was just like blown away that someone could have
That is
actually just
interesting.
liked stoner. Yeah.
Yeah, now I do have to watch this, like, because that's interesting to me, because he clearly has like some sort of defense mechanism up as to why somebody, like, so if you're thinking about something binary, right? And like I'm saying this, I have not watched a second of this guy talk. This is not about him at all, just like theoretically. If you come with anything binary, like if I'm like Brussels sprouts are gross, anybody who likes Brussels sprouts is a piece of shit. And then I find out actually Brussels sprouts is Ben's favorite food of all time. Now I have a disconnect here. I'm like, well, do I hold what I was just saying? And I have to be like, well, actually, I grew up in Kansas. The Brussels sprouts in Kansas, they were made with some formaldehyde. They just sprinkled lightly some formaldehyde on there. So it's not the same Brussels sprouts. So now that's just a defense mechanism to keep me from not actually having to engage with the fact that clearly some people do like Brussels sprouts. So I think there has to be something like that going on.
There was some major cognitive dissonance, I think, at play. Like, but it was interesting. Like he didn't seem to want to engage about like Jimmy's experience of McCarthy or Stoner and like why Jimmy liked it or thought they were high quality versus his reasons. Like he felt like this book critic who's been reading like thousands and thousands of books for years and being like a famous book critic who, like, I think he felt like he was truly an arbiter of objective writing quality.
I think this is a problem that critics sometimes fall into.
Yeah.
Like,
No, it was
Roger Ebert was very much like that too, where he's just like, I know quality.
Yeah, if people have enough experience of a certain thing or artistic medium, like they feel like they've just built up so much of that you know, that compared to other people that they're just more knowledgeable, but they still discount, I think, people's subjective different takes with, you know, being as valid as theirs, even if they're less experienced with the
I just have a quick anecdote about Roger Ebert, which I love, that like it just made me think of. So when the last Airbender movie came out, which doesn't exist and should never be watched, his review started with what I think is the best start of a review ever, which is, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but this is very close to what his review started with. This is like a professional critic who is like one of the most well-respected movie critics of all time. He starts it off with, just by the laws of chance, something in this movie should have worked. Unfortunately, it did not. Like, I was like, dude, that's brutal.
There's a certain entertainment value to when someone just critically pans something. And so like, it was entertaining watching him just like pan Cormac McCarthy or Stoner and saying like, this is garbage. But then like on his best of list of fantasy from last year, you know, he really is like a maverick, because he had something near the top, like Brian McClellan's In the Shadow of Lightning.
Oh, that book's not very good. Objectively garbage, sir.
And so like he's panning like, you know, a literary grade of our age, like Cormac McCarthy, and then loving Brian McClellan. Like I like that he's just doing his own thing, but to not be more aware of like that he is just not an arbiter of objective quality is strange. I do think it's probably a common among in the critics.
I love how the last half an hour of this has just been like, let's criticize a guy that I've never spoken to or heard speak. I'll watch that though. I do like hearing dissenting opinions. I just sometimes people's confidence is a little grating. So I don't know. People are in the chat are saying that they ended up really liking the guy. Jimmy was positive. Jake was positive. So I was like, okay, he probably comes off better than he sounds. I'm very confident in being able to communicate my own personal reactions to books, which is why I don't get too analytical in my reviews, like on Goodreads, on YouTube. Like I am mostly just using it as a reading diary and explaining my like how I connected, and like if I was really like engaged and immersed, like I just want to get the hype about that and just convey my experience and my emotional experience, because I'm very confident in knowing that. I am much less confident in being able to critically analyze. Well, first of all, I don't do that when I read, like first reads usually, but then like the feeling like, you know, I don't want to go into like making statements where I'm claiming things are objective when they really were subjective. Like I think I got put off of like Daniel Green's channel for a lot because he was just so confidently delivering like objective statements like, you know, Greenbone Saga or Poppy War. It's like revolutionizing the modern fantasy genre. It's like making sweeping generalizations like that very confidently and not couching them in more of like subjective terms. And so I do try to avoid that. But I revolutionizing a genre is like, that's still a subjective statement, but that's different than saying like it's one of the best. Because I agree,
Yeah.
Poppy War changed the landscape of fantasy now. Just because that and Dandelion Dynasty were really the only like Asian inspired fantasy that was like getting big. And now R.F. Kuang has obviously gone on to become like much more famous than I think any of us predicted when
Yeah.
that series came out. So then those people are going to go back and read the Poppy War. So it's like it has changed a lot, because now people, when they think of like fantasy, that's going to be more part of their like cultural consciousness, and then that's going to. So I get what he was trying to say with that, but I know what you mean overall.
Yeah. No, this is it's very fascinating to me, but I do think a lot of people thread the needle of like giving somewhat like objective evaluations of books while still it being clearly, couching it in subjective terms. Like a lot of the reviewers I really love watching their book reviews, like Jimmy, the Fantasy Network, and Alan, Philip Chase. Like those are some of the only people I usually watch their actual like book reviews of
Same.
things I haven't read or things that I've read and I
Jake
want to go
too.
back and Jake, yeah. They thread that needle, I think, really well, and they're just doing an awesome job with that.
I think I've heard somebody else say this, but I'm going to reiterate it because I really agree. Which is like, obviously we come to different reviewers for different things, but I always watch your reviews because you like have a lot of enthusiasm for like what you liked and why you liked it, and like, you know, to juxtaposition with Jimmy. Jimmy's funny in the sense that he'll read a book and he'll tell you a lot of really eloquent thoughts about it, and like, and then he'll be like, oh, and here's like a passage from it and what I think it conveys, and then he'll be like, but maybe I'm an idiot, maybe it's terrible, I don't know, like he just like backtracks right at the end. He's just like, actually, don't listen to me, I've been choked a lot, I don't know what's going on, but like he just said a bunch of really wise and interesting things, and then now here he is again saying I don't know what I'm doing. That's not true, Jimmy.
Yeah.
And then you have somebody like Alan who's just like, it's amazing. So like, it's just great how everybody brings their own lens to
Yeah.
what they're talking about.
That's great about BookTube in general, and yeah, when I first came to BookTube, it was through Daniel Green, and so like I was just like, oh, this is like my book guide. He's the most popular one. Like, oh, the first things that I read that he also liked, like I like, and so like, and then I started to read things that he was recommending, like Lightbringer, Poppy War, Book of the Ancestor, that I didn't connect with, and I'm like, oh, now I can see like, oh, let me carve out my own fantasy reading identity here and branch out in BookTube, and then BookTube just exploded with so many channels like
Yeah,
in the
once you
last
go
bunch of
deeper, you're
years.
like, oh,
Yeah.
there's so many people. Also, just to jump on the Daniel Green hate train for just a minute, because I don't like to do that much because the guy is dealing with a lot. The one thing he said that drove me absolutely bonkers is he was talking in a video one time, and he just said, like, kind of as an offhand thing, that the Long Walk by Stephen King is like one of the worst pieces of things he's ever read. And he's like, I don't even know how that could be a book. And then he just moved on. And I was like, sir, that's one of his best. We, the Stephen King community, have judged that as one of his best. Like, how dare you? So sometimes he does come off a little bit that way.
Yeah, just blanket statements. They do seem to generate engagement. Yeah, Nikki doesn't have the energy for that. Yeah, I don't either. I just want to convey like what I'm reading, how I'm feeling about it, and maybe I'll gain some confidence to get into the more analytical side, like Jimmy does in his reviews. But yeah, no, I think that's very hard to do, and Jimmy's reviews I think just do it beautifully, like mixing the like personal experience of the book with a more analytical approach to it. Yeah.
Jake, not making blanket statements is overrated. Yeah, I will say one thing that I had to really contend with, and this is like evident on Discord and stuff too, but like it's just more evident when I'm talking to somebody, is the way that I speak is really hyperbolic for a couple reasons. One, just my parents, like they just say the most absurd shit all the time, and they don't mean any of it. So it's like it's just how I grew up. And then I spent my teenage years listening to Lewis Black and George Carlin, who just they filter all of their jokes through like righteous anger. And so when I talk, like, and people who know me in my personal life, they've known that I talk this way for years. So if I'm just like, that's the absolute worst, like anybody who likes that is literally garbage. Like literally, I think you should die if you like this. They know I'm not serious. And so I've had to really learn how to do that in a way that like people get that I'm not serious, but still like I still want to be me. I still want my personality to come through. So I don't want to
Mhm.
like change my entire style of humor or like not say things that I think are funny, because that's what amuses me, is to talk
Yeah,
like
yeah.
over exaggerated like that. But then somebody like, then I'm always like, oh, but somebody's gonna get mad that I think this, and I'm like, nah, it's just way different being on the internet.
Jake's imagining that person when he's reviewing as the counterexample, but yeah, I think you got to just do you, and then be yourself. And out there on the internet, people are gonna get angry, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But just being authentic, I think, is what attracts people most of all. Just like, oh, this is like just my vibe over here, and in the long term, like, you can't be putting on air. That's too exhausting.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think Daniel Green has found that, like, just like being popular on YouTube is exhausting, and is, he feels like he can't be himself or do what he wants to do half the time, and that's brutal. Because just doing this as a hobby, the booktube thing, like, man, if I
Wait,
barely have time to just
you're
do
not
the
being
videos.
paid by these authors? You're not a shill? I thought you were a shill.
Yeah, yeah. The Severing Sun shill. Yeah. Um, yeah, no. I've gotten like 2 books sent to me, and that was amazing. Like the first time that happened, was great.
I had a couple authors
But
send me
yeah.
some stuff, and I was really excited. And then one of the books, and it will remain unnamed for the dawn of time. Uh, I hated like within 3 pages. Like I immediately was like, I don't like this. And then I gave it like another 2 chapters, and I was like, no, I literally hate this. Like I don't like this at all. So I just feel bad that author, like, and that's part, like, I know they know, like, intellectually, I know they're like, oh, not everybody I send a book to is going to like it. Uh, I understand that they know the risks, but I just don't feel comfortable. I'm like, this guy spent his own money to send me a physical copy of his book. I'm not
Yeah.
going to trash it. So,
Yeah, no, I'm just starting to get into that. Like, so an author who was nice in my comments for a little while, and sent me the free copy of the book, and I just could not have hated it more. It was like I just could not have connected to it less. Like, I hated everything about it from the beginning and couldn't get into it, and I just was silent. I felt there weren't many reviews for it, self pub, and man, this is another issue I'm gonna have to figure out
yeah,
as I go.
it's
Because
different for
yeah,
me if it's an ebook, because then they didn't pay money. That, I mean, I'm still not
yeah,
going to
yeah,
trash it. Like, I mean, I'm going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
polite, but um, at least with an ebook, they literally just sent me a file. Like,
yeah, yeah,
that's not
yeah.
the same thing as them like paying out of their own pocket to send me a physical book, especially internationally. So
Yep, but one of the things when you watch that chatting with Nuts, when Jimmy asked him about self pub, I really love that discussion. He was like, "No, you cannot move the goalposts for self pub. Like, it's a disservice to you as a reader and your viewers, people who are following you, because like what people choose to pick up and read, they're paying for that with real money, even if it's self pub. They're paying it with their time, their real
yeah,
minutes and seconds, which you can never get back. And so, yeah, I'm right with him. Like, we have to be honest with ourselves and with our audience or people on Goodreads, like with our experience of a book, because yeah, we shouldn't be moving goalposts just because people don't have many readers yet, or their self pub don't have the power of a publisher behind them. Like, there's just so much to read. We do have a limited number of days ahead of
yeah.
us, so we want to read good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and you should always be nice. Like I don't like,
Mhm.
there's nobody that I can think of, like even Brian Stavley, he's the only person I made a review specifically to be negative about. I still like don't think Brian Stavley's a bad dude or a bad author. Like, I've liked some of his books, so it's not like I'm like hating on it when I do that. So when people come around and they're just like, "This is bad," and people who like this are bad or whatever, I'm like, what are you doing? But my self pub takes have evolved over time, because you kind of have to gain the confidence. So I read Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. And at the time, Daniel T. Jackson was an acquaintance of mine. I spoke to him semi-regularly, and he was really excited for me to try his book. And I kept telling him that I would. And I really didn't like it. I had a lot of problems with it. And I just DNF'd it. And then I gave it some time. I didn't tell him that I read it at all. I didn't really tell anybody. And then I
Mm-hmm.
gave it like a month or two, and I tried it again, and I read like another 40% of it or 30% of it. And I was like, I hate this book. I DNF'd it. And I never made a review. I never put my rating out there. I only told a few people that I didn't really like it, because I was like, I don't want to hurt this guy's feelings or like the fact that I like him. And then what really changed this all was 11th Cycle for me, which I don't think 11th Cycle should have been published. And that is not a reflection on the author as a human being. I get that, sometimes funds are, he claims it was edited. I don't know, like it needed better editing. That is not a finished product. And that was what really made me change, because people are paying their real money for this. And you have reviewers who privately had come to me, or like we'd been talking, and we're like, yeah, I don't really think this is very good. There's like a lot of errors, but they weren't mentioning those errors in their reviews, which is totally on them. Like if they don't want to do that, but then I'm like, but then people pick this up expecting a thing, and then they feel lied to. And you could see that in the reviews of the book, is that a lot of people were like, oh, like some reviewers really sold this book to me, and I think it's false marketing. Like those are reviews of the book. So we really have to be conscious of like, if a book is bad, or not bad, if we don't like a book, we should be able to talk about why without it feeling like we're doing something negative, because you can get into a slippery slope that way.
Yeah. And if you know the authors kind of in like personally, it's really tough. Like I feel that way with certain authors where, and I know people have been worried about, approaching Philip Chase's books because, it changes the dynamic with how you can review, or if you really respect the author or know them personally, it's tough. And so like Mike, I'm very glad I did not know you or interact with you at all before reading this one, because I don't think I was
I'm excited to try this book
in any way. I genuinely connected to it and enjoyed it, and so it's good, I think, for me that I did not interact with you much, because and I didn't enjoy like maybe as much like the second book. I think I was able to be honest about that, but still really liked it. So thanks, Mike, for totally agreeing
and
there.
While we're talking about self-published authors and their like agreements and stuff, shout out to Baptiste Paison Wu, who is writing the Heroes of Chaos, or the Three Kingdoms Chronicles. That's something that is really near and dear to me, that history. And I'm a way more critical, like I have way more thoughts on literally every little piece of those books than I would normally. And so like I've talked to him, I'm like, hey, just so you know, like when I review this book, I'm going to have these problems, but like I still really liked it. And he's always been very like nice about that and gracious. And then he even like invited me on his channel to talk to him about it. So like, I lost my train of thought, but just like there's a lot of self-pub authors that do really understand that like just because you like give a book a 4-star and you have some issues doesn't mean that it's you didn't like the book.
No, when authors are doing that, when they're getting angry and not getting the 5 stars, like Uber drivers, like they're Uber drivers, like they want the full 5, like they need to chill out and be happy when people like the book, or accepting when they don't, and give critical reviews. Like I just like could not believe the way that Daniel Jackson talked about that review. Like I didn't have an issue with
that. I feel like that got so
I didn't have an but like him blocking or not blocking people on social media, like whatever, but like when he mentioned like in his tweets like this review in a very derogatory way, like doing something that it wasn't doing, like I was like really taken aback, like, oh, this is not a healthy way for authors to be interacting with like public reviews and criticism of their works. Like they should be more just open-minded, engaging with them, and open to see like what are people's experiences. Should I be rethinking anything in my approach? Like, did I want it to land like that? So that was bothersome. I will never be interested in picking up Illborn because of your criticism, but also just like that author, his stance towards just criticism in general turned me off.
Jake is talking about a Reddit thread that I actually did read, and it was wild. Like, so I want anybody who like goes on Reddit and like has an interest in this to go to this am I the asshole thread about this guy. And to be fair, I think it was an everybody sucks situation, because I think the way he handled it specifically wasn't great. But the thrust of it was that this author like literally like attacked. He knew the guy personally, and he like attacked him personally. It was like bad mouthing him to his friends, and like being really mad that he only gave him a 4-star review. And he's like, am I the asshole for giving a 4-star review? And the comments are basically like, yes, you are an asshole. And I was like, this is crazy. That is unbelievable.
Yeah, no, that's nuts. That's nuts. I guess different people view star ratings differently than like our silo. Like, where we're coming from, like usually anything in the above the median, like above 3 is looking pretty good on the book. Like, But yeah, no, that is nuts to me. Yeah, it made Jake upset. Yep. But I think we're gonna wrap up here. I know we both got to run for things today, but thank you so much, Kyle, for coming
this was
on.
really
This
fun.
was a blast.
This was like, I can't even believe we're at 2 hours. Like I feel like we just flew by. So thanks for engaging all of my rants and long-winded thoughts.
Oh, I love it. I love it. We got to do this more often. Thank you all in the comment section. So many people came on. So thank you so much for adding to it. And you all are awesome in the comments. A lot of you have amazing channels that I watch religiously. And so, yeah, keep doing what you're doing. All right.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you later.